Hey, deep divers. If you're enjoying these deep dives, you know what to do. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And today we're going to be looking at something really, really interesting and important. We're going to be diving deep into the world of election manipulation.
Oh, yeah.
All those kind of underhanded
hmm
tactics, designed to, well, basically mess with public perception.
Okay.
And in a lot of ways, hijack democracy itself. It's a bit scary when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah. So we're going to be focusing on an article by David Rothkopf that was in the Daily Beast. It's got a very striking title. I'll just read it out. Trump isn't playing to win the election. He's plotting to steal it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, there's some pretty strong accusations being made in this article. We're going to be looking at all the usual suspects, fake polls, lawsuits aimed at suppressing voter turnout, and even, whispers of foreign interference. It's a lot to unpack. But, the goal here, as always, is to equip you guys with the knowledge to see through all this, all these smoke and mirrors and really understand what's going on. And for this journey into the abyss, I had to bring on the perfect guide, our expert on all things election integrity. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to shine a light on these issues.
So, okay, let's jump right into this article. The author's central argument seems to be that the Trump campaign, seeing the writing on the wall, maybe sensing that they might be losing, are shifting gears. Instead of focusing on winning votes, they're now focused on, well, basically undermining the entire process.
Yeah, you've summarized it perfectly. And one of the most alarming tactics they highlight is this just flood of questionable polls.
Right.
I mean, the article mentions there have been something like 75 suspect polls in just the past week. 75. It's a crazy number. And it's all designed to create this illusion of inevitability. They bombard people with these polls, all saying the same thing. This candidate is winning, this candidate is way ahead. And it can actually make people less likely to question the results later on, even if they're suspicious.
Right. It's like setting the stage to cry foul later on, right?
Exactly. It's about manufacturing a narrative, not reflecting reality. And these polls, they're not your typical, scientific polls. These are what are often called push polls or purpose polls,
Yeah.
Carefully designed to push a specific agenda.
Now, the article specifically calls out these red wave pollsters.
Yes.
Aren't those the same folks who were behind those, wildly inaccurate predictions in the 2022 midterms?
That's right. And, their whole strategy is based on inflating expectations to then, sow seeds of distrust in the actual results. Later on, it preys on people's anxieties. And in today's world, with hyper-partisanship and misinformation running rampant, it can be incredibly effective.
So it's not just about the polls themselves. It's about the impact they have on people's perceptions.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got these fake polls setting a predetermined narrative.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. Right. The article also talks about a whole wave of lawsuits targeting voter rolls and the way ballots are processed. Is this more of the same? Trying to game the system?
That can be, you see, while some lawsuits might raise legitimate concerns, there are others that seem designed to just, create hurdles, make it harder for certain people to vote.
Yeah.
And they often do this under the banner of preventing voter fraud. But the real impact is often to disenfranchise legitimate voters. And it often targets, specific demographics.
So it's like they're weaponizing this fear of voter fraud to justify tactics that actually undermine the very thing they claim to be protecting.
It's a classic tactic.
Pretty twisted.
It is. And it's important to remember that voter suppression has a long and ugly history in this country, particularly targeting marginalized communities.
Right. It's a dark part of our past that we can't afford to forget.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the fake polls. We've got the lawsuits aimed at making it harder to vote. But the article also delves into the world of disinformation. And this feels like it's been amplified tenfold in recent years.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole other level of manipulation, and it's insidious. The article claims there's a coordinated effort to spread disinformation, possibly even involving foreign actors. We're not talking about, old school spy stuff. This is sophisticated stuff. They're exploiting our cognitive biases, our emotions, even the algorithms that curate our online experiences.
Yeah, it's like a virus, spreading through social media, infecting people's minds with doubt and distrust.
Exactly.
Making it hard to even know what's real anymore.
It erodes trust not just in the electoral process, but in our institutions, the media, even in each other.
Right.
It leads to chaos, confusion, and that's when things get really dangerous.
This is all pretty chilling stuff, honestly. I mean, what can we as individuals even do about it?
Well, the first step is awareness. Understanding the tactics being used is crucial to spot them and resist their influence.
Okay.
It's about becoming more discerning consumers of information, not just, blindly accepting everything we see online.
So this deep dive is basically self-defense training for the information age. I like
That's
that.
a great way to put it.
But it's also about protecting something much bigger,
Yeah,
right? It's about protecting the very foundation of our democracy.
couldn't agree more.
Now, this article, it focuses primarily on one side of the political spectrum, but this isn't a one-sided issue, right?
Of course not. I mean, attempts to manipulate elections happen across the political landscape.
Right.
It's a human problem, a reflection of our desire for power and control. That's why it's so important to be critical of all information, regardless of the source.
So we need to be skeptical, but not cynical, right?
Exactly.
Don't just accept things at face value. Look for evidence. Consider different perspectives. Question motives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the bigger picture. While this article focuses on the current situation, it's important to remember that election manipulation has a long and fascinating history.
Oh, I bet. From ancient Rome to the digital age. I'm sure there's a treasure trove of stories about how people have tried to game the system.
You'd be surprised.
Well, deep divers, buckle up, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to be taking a trip through time to uncover the roots of election manipulation and see how these tactics have evolved. It's going to be a wild ride, so don't go anywhere.
Can't wait. Welcome back, Deep Divers. So before the break, we were talking about all these underhanded tactics being used to manipulate elections today. Fake polls, lawsuits, disinformation campaigns. It's a lot. But, this isn't exactly a new phenomenon, is it?
Right. Like I was saying before the break, I bet there's a whole treasure trove of stories from history about how people have tried to game the system.
Oh, there are plenty, sadly. Those in power have always been tempted to bend the rules.
Yeah, human nature, I guess.
It is. And one of the most classic examples, going way back, is good old-fashioned voter intimidation.
Right, like back in the Jim Crow era.
Exactly. Think poll taxes, literacy tests. Those were blatant attempts to suppress voter turnout, especially among minorities.
A very dark chapter in American history.
It is. And sadly, even though those specific tactics are no longer legal, we still see voter intimidation happening today, often targeting vulnerable communities.
Right. It's a reminder that the fight for voting rights is far from over.
It's an ongoing battle. And beyond those, more overt forms of intimidation, there are also much more subtle ways to game the system.
Like what?
Well, gerrymandering, for instance, has been around for centuries.
Gerrymandering, that's where they draw those crazy district lines, right?
Exactly. It's all about giving one party an unfair advantage, and it's been happening for a long time. By manipulating the boundaries of voting districts, you can effectively guarantee a win for your side regardless of the actual votes cast.
It sounds like something out of a political thriller, but it's happening right now in many places.
It is, and it undermines the very principle of one person, one vote.
Okay, so we've got voter intimidation, gerrymandering in the Hall of Fame of election manipulation.
Yeah.
But what about more modern examples? How is technology being used to mess with elections?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and honestly pretty scary.
Okay, I'm all ears.
We're seeing a rise in what's being called digital authoritarianism. Governments using technology to surveil citizens, censor information, manipulate online discourse, all to influence elections.
Like in China or Russia?
Exactly. Places where internet access and information are tightly controlled.
Right, where dissent is basically silenced.
Mm.
It's scary to think that social media, which was once hailed as this great tool for democracy, is now being weaponized by authoritarian regimes.
It is. It's like a dystopian future we were warned about, and it's not just limited to those regimes. We've seen evidence of foreign interference in democratic elections all over the world, often through these very sophisticated disinformation campaigns.
Like the 2016 U.S. election.
That was a prime example. All that talk of Russian troll farms, fake news spreading like wildfire on social media.
Right. It was a real wake-up call for a lot of people.
It exposed the vulnerabilities of our systems in this digital age.
It's unsettling to think that foreign actors can influence our elections just by manipulating what we see online.
And it's not just about, blatant lies. These campaigns often rely on much subtler tactics.
Like what?
Well, amplifying existing divisions, spreading conspiracy theories, eroding trust in institutions.
So basically creating chaos and confusion, making people question everything.
Exactly. And when people lose faith, they become much more susceptible to manipulation. It's a vicious cycle.
This all paints a pretty grim picture, I have to say. I mean, what can we do to protect ourselves and our democracies from all this manipulation?
There's no silver bullet, unfortunately. It requires a multi-pronged approach, individual responsibility, media literacy, government action, and technological innovation all working together.
Okay, let's break that down. What can we as individuals do, to sort of arm ourselves against these tactics? Feels like we're constantly bombarded with information these days.
It is overwhelming, but it all starts with becoming critical consumers of information.
Hmm.
Don't just blindly accept everything you see online or hear from your favorite pundit.
Okay.
Check your sources,
Hmm.
look for evidence, be wary of those sensational headlines that are designed to, trigger an emotional response.
So be skeptical, but not cynical.
Precisely, don't assume everything is fake, but don't take anything at face value either.
Hmm.
Think of yourself as an investigator, gathering evidence, evaluating different perspectives before forming an opinion.
That's a good analogy.
And it's not just about individuals. Media literacy plays a crucial role as well.
Media literacy, that's all about understanding how media works, right?
Exactly how information is produced, disseminated, how to identify bias, spin manipulation.
Okay.
It's about developing those critical thinking skills and learning to ask the right questions.
So it's not just about what we believe, but why we believe it.
Exactly. You need to understand the forces shaping your perceptions. But individual responsibility and media literacy can only take us so far. We also need governments to step up and address this threat to democracy.
Right. What role should governments play in all this? It seems like a tricky balance, between protecting free speech and preventing the spread of harmful disinformation.
It is. There's a lot of debate about, the role of government in regulating online content. Some argue for greater oversight to combat disinformation while others worry about censorship.
Right.
It's a tough line to walk, but there's things governments can do, investing in media literacy programs, supporting independent journalism, holding social media platforms accountable for the content they host.
So finding that balance between free speech and ensuring a fair and transparent electoral process.
Exactly. But what about the role of technology itself? Can technology be part of the solution?
That's an interesting question.
It is, because, the same technologies that are being used to manipulate elections can also be used to protect them. There are a lot of brilliant minds working on this problem, developing tools and techniques to detect and counter disinformation.
Like those fact-checking algorithms I've heard about.
Exactly. And there are also efforts to develop more secure voting systems and even explore ways to use blockchain technology to create tamper-proof election records.
It's encouraging to know that there are people working on solutions.
It is, but it does feel like a constant arms race, a cat and mouse game between those who want to manipulate the system and those who want to protect it.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. The very future of democracy hangs in the balance.
Well said. We've explored a lot of dark corners today, but I think it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
Absolutely.
We can arm ourselves with knowledge, we can be more discerning consumers of information, and we can demand action from our leaders.
The future of democracy depends on an informed and engaged citizenry.
Okay, deep divers, we've covered a lot of ground today, from ancient Rome to the digital age. We've explored the tactics, the history, the implications of election manipulation. But what does it all mean for you? Why should you care? Well, we'll unpack that and more when we come back for the final part of our deep dive, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back, deep divers. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we, through the twisted history of election manipulation, from the good old days of ancient Rome all the way to our modern digital age.
Yeah, it is fascinating and frightening at the same time, how those in power have always been tempted to, tilt the scales in their favor.
Yeah, and using every trick in the book, right, from brute force to, these really sophisticated psychological tactics.
It's like a playbook that's been passed down through the ages, constantly being updated with the latest technologies.
Right, and speaking of technology, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, and on the one hand, it offers amazing new ways for people to participate in the democratic process,
Yeah.
more transparency, more access to information. But on the other hand,
It's become this incredibly powerful tool for manipulation and control.
exactly. So we've unpacked the tactics, exposed those historical patterns, explored the, pretty alarming implications. But what does it all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah.
Why should you care about all this?
Well, because the health of our democracy depends on us, on an informed and engaged citizenry. It's not something we can just take for granted.
Right. We can't just sit back and assume that everything's going to be fine.
Exactly. We need to be active participants, and that starts with understanding, the tactics being used to manipulate us.
So knowledge is power.
Absolutely. When we understand how they're trying to play us, we can resist their influence and make informed decisions, based on facts, not fear or, some fabricated narrative.
It's about reclaiming our power, right?
Exactly, not letting those who would manipulate the system dictate the narrative or, determine the outcome of our elections.
So we got to be vigilant.
We do. Democracy is a precious and fragile thing. It requires constant vigilance to protect it.
Awareness.
Awareness, absolutely.
So after this deep dive into, all the dark corners of elections, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
That's a good question. I think it boils down to this: be skeptical, be informed, and most importantly, be engaged.
Be engaged.
Yes. Don't let apathy or cynicism be the downfall of our democracy. Get involved. Stay informed. Make your voice heard. Your vote is your voice, and it's powerful. Don't underestimate it.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. And remember, deep divers, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Absolutely.
We'll be sure to include some resources in the show notes to get you started.
Yeah, and if you found this deep dive illuminating, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with your friends. The more people we can reach with this information, the better.
The stronger our democracy becomes.
Exactly.
Well said. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay engaged.
Deep divers